They paid for my sister's college, not mine. Everyone applauded me at graduation, not her. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching us from. From the outside, the James household was a portrait of middle-class American respectability. Nestled in the well-trimmed neighborhoods of suburban Atlanta, their two-story colonial-style home stood behind a manicured lawn and white picket fence. The hedges were always trimmed, the windows washed, and a modest flag hung over the porch. Neighbors waved to the family as they passed by, admiring what looked like a model of stability. But appearances, as Naomi James had learned from a young age, were rarely the whole truth. Naomi, at 22, carried herself with a quiet kind of strength. She was slender and sharp-featured, with rich brown skin that glowed under the Georgia sun and eyes that missed nothing. She had inherited her father's strong jawline and her mother's thick black curls, though she kept hers pulled into a tight bun most days, partly for practicality, partly to dull the sting of her mother's frequent critiques about neatness. Standing next to her younger sister Savannah, with her pale honey skin, soft curls, and lighter hazel eyes, the two could have been mistaken for distant cousins rather than siblings. Their parents, Regina and Paul James, never spoke of color in their household. They were not overtly cruel, nor were they ever explicitly racist, at least not in any way that a stranger might notice. They were, in fact, well-educated, respected members of their community. Paul worked as a senior claims analyst at an insurance firm, and Regina was a school district administrator known for her strict discipline and her no-nonsense attitude. But under their roof, subtle favoritism played out like background music, always present, never acknowledged. Naomi had noticed the divide from the time she was 7. On Christmas mornings, Savannah received dolls that could talk, glittering dress-up clothes, and once, an actual miniature electric piano. Naomi would receive books, socks, or once a backpack for school. "You've always been the more practical one," her mother would say when Naomi asked why Savannah's gifts were always more exciting. "You're so independent. You don't need as much to be happy." It was said with a smile, as if independence was a reward instead of the consequence of emotional neglect. There were pictures all around the house, on mantels, along staircases, on Regina's social media pages, showing Savannah posing at ballet recitals, school plays, and award ceremonies. Naomi's photos, when they appeared, were often in the background or cropped at the edge, as if she had wandered into the shot by accident. When Savannah won her 5th grade spelling bee, the entire family went out for dinner to celebrate. When Naomi placed 2nd in the district-wide math competition that same year, her parents congratulated her briefly before reminding her to wash the dishes. At school, Naomi excelled, though she rarely spoke of it at home. Her teachers praised her analytical mind, her ability to lead group projects, and her quiet determination. She read everything she could get her hands on, preferring the library to the lunchroom, where cliques formed quickly and unspoken rules about popularity excluded girls like her. Over the years, her report cards became an archive of unrecognized triumphs, her achievements building a quiet tower no one at home bothered to climb. Savannah, on the other hand, basked in constant light. She was praised for her poise, her charisma, and her natural grace. When she decided to run for class president in the 10th grade, Regina immediately called in favors with her contacts in the PTA to help with campaign materials. Naomi had once started a business club in middle school that helped raise money for local shelters. It never received more than a passing mention at dinner. By the time Naomi was 16 and Savannah 14, the divide had deepened into a trench. Savannah had been sent to a private preparatory high school With tuition, Regina and Paul managed through tight budgeting and a few parental sacrifices. Naomi remained at the public school, where she enrolled in advanced placement courses and joined every club that offered free snacks and networking opportunities. She didn't ask why Savannah got the better education. She already knew the answer. Or rather, she knew there would never be one that would satisfy her. The final year of high school brought the truth into sharp, unbearable focus. Naomi had applied to several universities, aiming high. She'd been accepted into a competitive business program at Southridge University, known for its focus on minority entrepreneurship and innovation. When the acceptance letter arrived, Naomi didn't scream or cry. She had learned long ago that emotional displays were rarely rewarded in her home. Instead, she folded the letter carefully and brought it to the dinner table, laying it between her plate and Savannah's bowl of pasta. "I got into Southridge," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Paul looked up from his phone, blinking. "That's the one with the scholarship, right?" Naomi nodded. "A partial scholarship. I'll still need some help with tuition and living expenses, but it's—" "That's great, honey," Regina cut in, smiling at Savannah. "Savannah, did you remember to call Mrs. Talbot about your dance recital?" Naomi's words stalled in her mouth. It wasn't just the interruption, it was the dismissiveness. She had poured everything into her application, worked through weekends, edited essays at 3 a.m. She had received recommendations from 2 department heads. She had gotten in on her own, and it still wasn't enough. 2 weeks later, the final blow came. The family sat down for a rare dinner together. Regina had cooked, and Paul had set aside his laptop. Naomi suspected something was coming, but didn't expect how deep it would cut. "We need to talk about college," Paul began, his eyes settling on Savannah. "Your mother and I have decided we're going to pay for your education, Savannah. Full tuition, dorm, everything." Savannah beamed, barely hiding her excitement. Naomi waited. She looked at both parents. "And what about me?" There was a silence. Regina cleared her throat. "Naomi, you're incredibly resourceful. You've always been the kind of girl who makes her own way." "We've only saved enough for one of you," Paul added, "and Savannah's program is more structured. Political science leads to very clear careers. Well, business is more unpredictable." "You mean riskier," Naomi said, her voice low. Her mother offered a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's not personal, baby. It's just practical." Naomi nodded slowly, biting the inside of her cheek. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. She excused herself early and spent the evening in her room, staring at the ceiling, the acceptance letter lying open on her desk like an unanswered question. In the days that followed, she moved mechanically through the motions of life. At school, she smiled when her teachers congratulated her. At home, she avoided family dinners. On her laptop, she began filling out FAFSA forms, researching scholarships, calculating the interest on student loans. She updated her resume and applied for summer jobs. If she was going to make it on her own, she would do it with her eyes open. The final confirmation that she was truly on her own came not with cruelty, but with indifference. At a family gathering celebrating Savannah's early admission to the University of Georgia, Naomi's own accomplishment was barely mentioned. An aunt asked where she'd be going, and when Naomi answered, the woman blinked politely and said, "Oh, that's nice. I'm sure you'll do great things." Naomi smiled and excused herself to the kitchen, where she stood by the sink gripping the counter, trying not to cry. She wasn't sure if it was anger or sadness or something more corrosive, a numbness that threatened to become permanent. After everyone left, she found herself sitting in the backyard under the stars. It was quiet. The wind moved gently through the trees, and somewhere in the distance she heard a car pass. The air smelled of honeysuckle and damp grass. In that moment, she made herself a promise. Not to become successful just to prove something to them, but because she knew, deep in her bones, she could. And she would. When she told her parents she'd accepted her place at South Ridge and had secured a dorm room through financial aid, they barely looked up from their devices. "That's great," Regina said, her tone lukewarm. "Let us know if you need help with moving boxes." Paul nodded. "Maybe your Uncle Leon can lend you his van." Naomi thanked them without emotion. She didn't need a van. What she needed was a clean break. As summer turned to fall and move-in day approached, she packed her belongings into hand-me-down suitcases and cardboard boxes she found behind the grocery store. No one offered to help her carry them. She booked a budget rideshare to campus. Her roommate was someone she had never met, her dorm a tiny shared space with thin walls and flickering lights, but it was hers. And that meant more than anyone at home would ever understand. She stood at the window of her new room that first night, watching the lights of the campus shimmer in the distance. Somewhere down there, hundreds of students like her were beginning their own journeys. Many of them had support systems, parents who'd write checks, drop off groceries, call every Sunday. Naomi had none of that. But she had something else. Resolve, and with that, her new life began. The silence of her childhood, the weight of invisibility, the ache of being the shadow cast by her sister's light, they no longer defined her. They had forged her. And while no one was watching, she had begun to sharpen herself into something powerful. The story was only beginning. Naomi quickly learned that the myth of college as a place of freedom and self-discovery didn't quite apply the same way when your freedom came with a mountain of bills and your self-discovery had to be squeezed between night shifts and unpaid internships. The glossy brochures that had once advertised Southridge University's vibrant campus life now seemed like cruel jokes when compared to her daily reality. Her dorm room, with its rattling heater and shared bathroom down the hall, offered little comfort, but it was still a step forward, a space she could call her own. It became her sanctuary, her workspace, and sometimes her battlefield. The first semester came at her like a wave. She had signed up for a full course load in business fundamentals, economics, and a statistics class that made her question her sanity by the third week. While her classmates organized welcome parties and joined clubs, Naomi was memorizing interest rate formulas while washing coffee cups at her job on the corner of Jefferson and Vine. The cafe was small, but always busy, with a manager who barked orders and a tip jar that never filled fast enough. She worked the early morning shift, waking at 5 to arrive by 6, brewing espresso for professors and sleep-deprived students until her first lecture started at 9. She barely had time to breathe. Every hour her day was mapped out. Class, work, lunch, usually eaten while walking, more class, study, then a closing shift at the cafe 2 nights a week. On weekends, she picked up extra shifts at the bookstore across from campus. Sundays were supposed to be for rest, but she used them to catch up on assignments and plan her week in meticulous detail, often falling asleep over textbooks with highlighters still in her hand. Her classmates, many of whom came from well-supported backgrounds, spoke casually of their parents wiring money, of trips home on weekends, of internships arranged through family connections. Naomi listened, smiled politely, and returned to her laptop, where she tracked every cent in a budgeting spreadsheet that determined whether she could afford both groceries and textbooks that month. Once, when her economics professor mentioned a $200 software package that wasn't technically required but highly recommended, Naomi sat in the back of the lecture hall and quietly fought tears. That evening, she found a free alternative with limited functionality and taught herself how to use it. Despite the struggle, or perhaps because of it, Naomi began to excel. The classes that overwhelmed others were ones she absorbed with quiet intensity. Business concepts, consumer psychology, operational models. They weren't abstract ideas to her, they were tools. Her lived experience had made her fluent in the language of efficiency and cost-benefit analysis. She didn't just study theory, she applied it. Every dollar she spent had a purpose. Every minute mattered. Midway through her first year, she discovered an online forum where students offered freelance services, editing, tutoring, graphic design. She created a simple profile offering digital flyers and social media post templates for student-run events and local businesses. Her rates were low, but her turnaround time was fast, and word began to spread. Before long, she had 3 regular clients and enough side work to cover half her monthly food expenses. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Meanwhile, her sister Savannah posted filtered photos of dorm decorations, brunches with sorority sisters, and weekend trips home. Naomi didn't comment. She had muted most of her family's social media by the end of the first semester, tired of the curated illusion of closeness and balance. Her parents rarely called. When they did, the conversation was stilted, focused on Savannah's latest achievements. "How's school?" Regina would ask, but not with interest, more like obligation. "Busy," Naomi would answer. "Good, that's good," Regina would say, then trail off. It was easier to hang up than to explain what busy really meant when your schedule ran like a machine and your success depended on it never breaking down. By the start of her second semester, Naomi had added another job. This time, a weekend shift at a small local accounting office run by a retired alum who liked to mentor students. The pay was better than the cafe, and she was learning real-world skills, processing invoices, managing spreadsheets, and watching how a small business stayed afloat. One evening, after closing, the owner pulled her aside. "You've got the mind of a strategist," he said, handing her a check. "Ever consider starting your own thing?" Naomi didn't answer right away. The truth was, she had considered it. Late at night, between classes and shifts, she had begun to sketch out ideas. What if she could create a platform for local businesses, especially those too small for full-time staff, to access affordable, reliable marketing and admin help? What if she could offer them virtual assistant services tailored to their scale? She had the skills. She just needed the time and tools. Spring break arrived, and while many students traveled or visited family, Naomi stayed on campus. She used the quiet week to build a basic website, taking advantage of free trials and student discounts. She named it BrightBridge Virtual, a nod to her hope of connecting overlooked businesses with solutions that could help them grow. She created packages, wrote her own copy, and designed a logo using free software. Then, she started emailing every small business she could find within a 50-mile radius. Plumbers, florists, yoga studios, tutoring centers. A few wrote back. One said yes. By the end of the semester, she had her first paying client, a bakery that needed help managing social media. Naomi spent hours crafting posts, researching local events, and designing branded templates. The bakery owner was so impressed, she recommended Naomi to 2 friends. The client list began to grow. Still, the pace of her life was relentless. On some days, she doubted she could keep it up. She missed meals, barely slept, and declined every invitation to parties, study groups, or club meetings. But every time she felt herself falter, she reminded herself what was at stake. She hadn't come this far to fail quietly. She was fighting not just for a degree, but for dignity. The contrast between her life and Savannah's only widened. Their birthdays were a month apart. That year, Savannah received a weekend getaway trip and a new phone. Naomi's birthday passed with a text from her parents that read, "Hope you have a great day, love you." She didn't expect more. She had stopped expecting more a long time ago. During a group project presentation, one of her professors approached her afterward. "You led that team like a seasoned manager," he said. "Have you considered applying for our honors entrepreneurship cohort? It's competitive, but I think you'd do well." Naomi applied. She was accepted. The cohort offered mentorship, access to grant applications, and networking events with local investors. She showed up to every meeting, despite being the only student in the group who still worked multiple jobs. She took notes while others spoke, asked the hardest questions, and stayed afterward to talk to the guest speakers. It was through this program that she met Professor Keller, a business strategist who had spent years consulting for Fortune 500 companies. He was intrigued by Naomi's business model and offered to advise her as she expanded. "There's something here," he said. "You're solving a real problem for an underserved market." By the start of sophomore year, BrightBridge Virtual had 5 regular clients. Naomi upgraded her website and hired another student, Samantha, a marketing major, to help with content creation. She paid her modestly but fairly, proud to be providing work even on a small scale. She invested in better software, using some of the money she had earned over the summer. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. Her grades remained near perfect. Her professors took notice. One wrote her a letter of recommendation so moving it made Naomi cry. She rarely thought of home anymore. She hadn't visited since she left for college, and no one had asked her to. Savannah's calls were infrequent, usually surface-level updates about sorority life or complaints about difficult professors. Naomi listened politely, then returned to her planner, where each hour was already accounted for. And yet, despite the distance and the ache of past rejection, she began to feel something unfamiliar. Pride. She had built something from nothing. Not out of rebellion, not even out of spite, but from belief. Belief in herself, in her vision, in her right to shape her own future. She would never forget the words her mother had once said across the dinner table. "Savannah's path is just more clear." But Naomi had learned something essential. Clear wasn't always better. Sometimes the paths we carve with our own hands, in the dark, stumbling forward despite every obstacle, lead to places brighter than anyone expected. And Naomi was just getting started. By the time Naomi entered the second semester of her sophomore year, BrightBridge Virtual was no longer just a side hustle. It had evolved into a working ecosystem, a budding business with structure, expectations, and most importantly, growth. What had once been late-night client calls and scrambled design sessions squeezed between coursework and shifts had become a steady, deliberate enterprise. With 5 consistent clients and several one-time projects flowing through her inbox each week, Naomi could finally begin to recalibrate her schedule. She dropped one of her jobs and restructured her days to give more breathing room for her business. That decision, though nerve-wracking at first, allowed her to lean more fully into entrepreneurship and push her company beyond its humble beginnings. She had also started to earn the respect of her professors, particularly Professor Keller, who had taken a real interest in her work. Under his mentorship, Naomi refined her business model. She transitioned from a patchwork of manual processes to a streamlined system, leveraging productivity tools and scheduling software to manage client needs. Her services became more sophisticated, integrated content strategy, digital analytics, and client engagement planning. Word-of-mouth referrals continued to trickle in, especially from small businesses struggling to maintain an online presence during the economic turbulence that still gripped much of the country. What Naomi offered was something rare: affordable, flexible support without the red tape or bloated overhead of larger agencies. Yet, despite her growing success, the demands on her time remained brutal. She still worked weekends at the accounting office and handled her coursework with the same diligence as ever. Nights were often spent staring at her laptop, cross-checking client needs against her own deadlines. Sleep remained scarce, and meals were still more about function than pleasure. But the pressure no longer felt suffocating. It had become familiar, even energizing. She had built something real, something that validated all the long hours and lonely nights. And then came the knock on her door that would shift everything again. It was a cold November evening. Naomi had just finished her final call with a bakery owner from outside Macon who needed help rebranding for the holidays. Her shoulders ached, and her eyes burned from too much screen time. She had just powered down her laptop when the knock sounded, soft at first, then again more urgent. She crossed the room and opened the door to find Savannah standing in the hallway, hugging her coat to her chest, cheeks flushed and eyes red-rimmed. Naomi froze. "Savannah? I'm sorry for just showing up," her sister said quickly. "I didn't know where else to go." Naomi stepped aside without speaking. Savannah entered and looked around the small but meticulously organized dorm room, her gaze landing on the whiteboard calendar filled with color-coded notes, the stack of textbooks, the little file cabinet labeled client invoices. "I'm failing my thesis," she said finally, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Professor Reynolds said my entire methodology is flawed. I don't even know what that means. I only have 3 weeks to fix it, or I might not graduate." Naomi leaned against her desk, arms folded. Part of her wanted to laugh. The other part felt something deeper, a strange mix of pity, vindication, and confusion. "Did you ask Mom and Dad for help?" she asked, not unkindly. Savannah shook her head. "They don't understand. They just said to talk to my advisor and keep trying. But I don't even know where to start." There was a long pause. Naomi stared at her sister, this girl who had always been so composed, so favored, now unraveling in her dorm room, asking for help. "Let me see your research," she said finally. That night marked the beginning of something Naomi hadn't anticipated, a slow, fragile thaw in the ice that had always divided them. For the first time, Savannah saw her sister not as the shadow at the family table, but as someone steady, capable, and endlessly resourceful. Naomi, for her part, discovered that helping her sister didn't diminish the pain of the past, but it gave it somewhere to go, somewhere useful. The next few weeks were a blur of late-night editing sessions, brainstorming, and frantic writing. Naomi guided Savannah through the core principles of research methodology, showed her how to build a logical framework, and helped her construct a thesis that was not only acceptable, but impressive. They spent evenings surrounded by coffee cups and highlighters, and amid the flurry of paper and exhaustion, their conversations turned personal. "How do you do all of this?" Savannah asked one night, waving at Naomi's business files and open textbooks. your grades, your company, your jobs. I can barely keep up with my classes." Naomi shrugged. "I didn't have a choice. If I didn't make it work, I wouldn't be here." Savannah looked down at her hands. "I didn't realize. I thought you were just naturally independent, that you liked doing things on your own." Naomi hesitated. "It's not about liking it. It's about learning not to expect anyone to show up for you." The words hung in the air, and Savannah didn't respond right away. She looked like she had swallowed something bitter, and perhaps she had, an awakening to her own privilege, to the unspoken hierarchy that had always shaped their family. From that moment on, their dynamic began to change. Savannah started pulling her weight, showing up early for study sessions, turning down expensive outings, and even rejecting a new laptop their parents had tried to send as a reward for her thesis progress. "I told them I'd manage with the one I have," she told Naomi proudly. "If you can do everything you do on your beat-up tablet, I can survive without the newest MacBook." Naomi raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Inside, something warm and cautious stirred. By January, Savannah's thesis had been submitted, revised, and tentatively approved. Her professors commended her improvement, noting a marked shift in clarity and depth. She had Naomi to thank for it, though she told her sister that wasn't enough. "I want people to know what you're doing," she said. "You're not just surviving, you're thriving. People should see that." Naomi smiled faintly. "They will. One day." That day arrived sooner than she expected. In March, Professor Keller nominated Naomi for a national competition, the Collegiate Business Innovator Challenge. The contest called for innovative business models from students who had successfully launched and maintained entrepreneurial ventures. Naomi's application stood out. She submitted a detailed case study of BrightBridge Virtual, highlighting the practical impact of her services on rural and minority-owned businesses. She included testimonials, growth metrics, and her financial model. Her presentation was clean, strategic, and powerful. She made it to the finals. As she prepared for the final round in April, Savannah became her sounding board, listening to her rehearse her pitch, offering feedback on language and delivery. It was a strange reversal of roles. Savannah watching her sister shine while she quietly supported from the sidelines. When Naomi stood before the panel of judges in a conference room packed with aspiring entrepreneurs, university faculty, and industry leaders, she did not tremble. She spoke with clarity and conviction about her vision, her clients, and the values that drove her business: accessibility, empathy, and resilience. When she finished, the applause came in waves. One judge leaned over his microphone and said, "This is the kind of model that changes local economies. You're not just running a business, you're building infrastructure." Naomi won the competition. Along with the prize money, enough to pay off a substantial portion of her student loans, came an article in Business Insight, a publication dedicated to emerging leaders. A photo of Naomi accepting the oversized check accompanied the headline, "Student CEO Redefines Support for Underserved Businesses." Savannah read the article 3 times before texting the link to their parents. They didn't respond. A week later, Naomi received a generic congratulations card in the mail. It wasn't signed. She laughed when she saw it. Then she threw it away. What mattered more was the letter she received from the university president, inviting her to serve as the student commencement speaker at graduation. It was an honor extended only to those who embodied the values of the institution: excellence, leadership, and service. Naomi had exemplified all 3, and now her story would be the one that closed the chapter on a generation of graduates. She accepted. As the semester drew to a close, Naomi continued expanding her business. She hired 2 more students to help manage client outreach and operations. With Professor Keller's help, she prepared for the transition into post-graduation life, weighing job offers and exploring partnerships that would allow Brightbridge to grow beyond the local market. She considered applying to the MBA program at South Ridge, where she could deepen her skills while continuing to build her company. And through it all, Savannah remained a constant presence, not just as a sister, but as a friend. The resentment that had once defined their relationship had slowly transmuted into something else: respect, even admiration. They had both been shaped by the same household, but only one of them had been forged in fire. Savannah, to her credit, had finally recognized that. "I can't undo the way things were," she said one evening over tea, "but I can make sure they don't stay that way." Naomi nodded. She believed her. As the date of commencement approached, Naomi received another unexpected invitation: a dinner hosted by the university's entrepreneurship faculty in her honor. It would be a private gathering to celebrate her achievements, toasting her award, her speech, and the success of her business. Savannah offered to come along as moral support. "That's your world," she said. "I want to see it up close." Naomi smiled. "It's your world too now. You helped me get here." The evening was elegant and understated. Faculty members shared stories about Naomi's journey, and more than one professor admitted to being inspired by her determination. A guest from a national consulting firm pulled her aside to talk about a potential internship. Naomi listened, gracious and composed, aware that she now stood in rooms she had once only dreamed about. And still, she had built it all from nothing. When she returned to her dorm that night, she stood at the window again, looking down at the campus lights. The same place she had stared out into during her first week, lonely, scared, uncertain. Only now everything had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was leading. And the world, whether it was ready or not, was finally beginning to see her. The weeks leading up to graduation passed in a whirlwind of final projects, last-minute meetings, interviews, and preparations for the commencement ceremony that would mark the official close of Naomi's 4-year journey. Yet, it wasn't just the culmination of an academic chapter that stirred something in her chest. It was the quiet, but unmistakable current of change running beneath the surface of everything. Change in her surroundings, in how her peers looked at her, in the recognition she had once believed would never come. But, perhaps most importantly, change in herself. Her days were still full, but the sense of desperate urgency had faded. The business, once a fledgling idea born out of necessity, now ran with precision and intention. Naomi had hired her 4th student assistant, a brilliant computer science sophomore who helped implement a more robust client management system. Revenue had doubled since the previous year, and her inbox regularly saw inquiries from clients referred by word of mouth or those who had read about her in the Business Insight article. For the first time, Naomi had begun declining projects, choosing to focus only on those that aligned with her company's long-term goals. Despite the mounting attention and success, she moved through campus with the same quiet confidence that had defined her since freshman year. Her peers, however, had started to take more notice. It wasn't uncommon now for students to stop her in hallways, in the library, or even at her favorite cafe with questions about starting their own ventures, navigating financial aid, or managing academics while working. She offered what advice she could, not because she craved their praise, but because she remembered what it felt like to have no one to ask. As her speech for the commencement ceremony took shape, Naomi reflected not only on her academic growth but on the emotional terrain she had crossed to arrive here. Every paragraph she wrote was weighed carefully, not just in tone or cadence, but in meaning. She didn't want to deliver a performance. She wanted to speak a truth that had cost her dearly. The address wasn't only for the graduating class. It was for every student who had sat alone in a dorm room with a rejected loan application, for every child who had learned too early that their family's love came with conditions. It was, in some quiet way, for the girl she had once been. And then, just days before the ceremony, her phone rang. The screen displayed her mother's name. Naomi let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Naomi." Regina's voice was measured, as if she had rehearsed what to say. "We wanted to let you know that your father and I are coming to graduation. We've rented a house nearby for the family. Everyone will be there. Your aunts, uncles, even Grandma Eloise. We'd love for you to join us for dinner the night before." There was a pause, the kind heavy with the weight of unspoken histories. "Thank you," Naomi said evenly. "I'll think about it." "We assumed you'd be busy, of course," her mother added quickly, as if softening the invitation would make its lateness less obvious. "But we wanted to extend it anyway." "I appreciate that," Naomi said. When the call ended, she sat still for a long moment, staring at the screen. No mention of her business award, no acknowledgement of her being named student speaker, just an invitation sent like a courtesy, an afterthought dressed up in familial obligation. She didn't cry. She didn't feel angry either, just oddly calm. The next morning, Naomi met with Dean Sinclair from the School of Business to go over logistics for her speech. After the meeting, as they walked out of the administrative building, Dean Sinclair turned to her with a smile. "There's something else," she said. "The faculty have voted unanimously to name you this year's valedictorian. You'll be the first student entrepreneur from this department to graduate at the top of the class. Your story, it's extraordinary." Naomi felt the breath catch in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "There's more," the dean continued. "The university board has decided to create a new scholarship, the Naomi James Resilience Award. It will be given annually to a student who has demonstrated exceptional perseverance in the face of adversity. The board felt your story should live beyond this moment." Naomi didn't speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice trembled slightly. "That means a lot." "You earned it," Dean Sinclair said simply. The night before graduation, Naomi stood in front of her closet, unsure what to wear to the dinner she had finally decided to attend. It wasn't vanity that made her hesitate. It was the symbolism. She wanted to arrive not as the girl they had dismissed, but as the woman she had become. She chose a simple emerald dress that fit her well, paired with modest heels and the silver earrings Savannah had gifted her after the competition win. Over her shoulder, she draped the soft navy blazer that had become a sort of armor in recent months. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a college student anymore. She saw a professional, a leader, herself. Savannah picked her up outside the dorm. "You sure you're okay with this?" she asked as Naomi slid into the passenger seat. "I'm not doing it for them," Naomi replied. "I'm doing it for me." The house their parents had rented was a sprawling two-story with wraparound porches and string lights that twinkled in the soft dusk. Cars filled the driveway, and the sound of laughter spilled from the open windows. As they approached the front door, Naomi felt her stomach tighten, not with fear, but with anticipation. Inside, relatives mingled in clusters. Her parents moved between them, hosts in their element. When Naomi entered, several heads turned. Conversations paused. Then came the warm, sudden burst of greetings. "There she is! Naomi, darling, look at you! We saw your picture in that magazine. So proud!" She smiled, accepted their hugs, nodded at their compliments. Her parents approached more slowly. Her father extended an arm, pulling her into a quick embrace that felt more formal than familiar. "You've certainly made a name for yourself," he said. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Naomi replied. Her mother's hug lingered a moment longer, but her expression remained unreadable. "Tomorrow is a big day," she said. "We're proud of both of you." Naomi met her gaze evenly. "I'm proud of myself, too." Dinner passed with the typical small talk. Work updates, family news, stories from cousins who hadn't seen each other in years. But under the polite surface, something had shifted. Naomi's presence was no longer peripheral. She was not merely included. She was centered, her accomplishments unmistakable, her strength undeniable. Her parents tried to steer conversations toward Savannah's future, but the questions kept circling back to Naomi. "So, what's next for the company? Any plans to expand? I heard the university's naming a scholarship after you. Is that true?" Naomi answered each one with composure, giving credit to her team, to her mentors, to the journey itself. She watched as her parents' expressions shifted, subtly, then visibly. Pride flickered in their eyes, but it was diluted by something else. Regret, maybe, or the dawning realization that they had never really known her. After dessert, her Uncle Jerome stood and raised a glass. "To Naomi," he said, voice booming over the clink of glasses, "who built something incredible with nothing but her own grit. You make us all look lazy." Laughter followed, but Naomi saw her father flinch slightly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. As she and Savannah left, their mother walked them to the door. "Naomi," she said quietly, "thank you for coming. I know, we haven't always been there the way we should have." Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked at her mother, the woman who had once told her, without flinching, that Savannah's future was a better investment. "I'm not angry anymore," Naomi said softly, "but I've stopped waiting for your approval." Her mother's eyes welled, but she said nothing. The morning of graduation was radiant. The sky was clear, the air warm, and the campus shimmered with the kind of energy that only comes once in a lifetime. Naomi dressed carefully, slipping on the stole Professor Keller had gifted her, embroidered with the words, "Lead with quiet fire." She pinned her cap, checked her reflection, and took one deep breath before stepping outside. Savannah met her at the robing area. "You ready?" she asked. Naomi nodded. "I've been ready for a long time." The ceremony was held in the main quad, where thousands of folding chairs lined the lawn. Families gathered in clusters, cameras poised, voices loud with joy. Naomi sat among the top students, the front row filled with honorees and speakers. As the program began, speeches flowed one after another, uplifting, hopeful, predictable. Then the president stepped to the podium. "This year," he said, "we honor a graduate who has not only achieved academic excellence, but who embodies the very spirit of resilience we aim to cultivate at South Ridge. Please join me in welcoming our student commencement speaker, valedictorian Naomi James." Naomi rose to a standing ovation. Her parents, seated near the front, watched in stunned silence as their daughter walked to the stage. Her chin high, her presence undeniable. She spoke with clarity, her voice unwavering as she told her story, not of hardship, but of determination. She spoke of building something out of the pieces others had cast aside, of finding strength not despite struggle, but because of it. She didn't mention her family. She didn't need to. Her message was larger than them. When she concluded, the crowd erupted. The applause felt endless. Later, the president returned to the microphone. In honor of Naomi's extraordinary journey, he said, "We are proud to announce the creation of the Naomi James Resilience Award. May it inspire future students to pursue their dreams even when the path is unclear." As the cheers rose again, Naomi looked out over the sea of faces and found Savannah's beaming with tears. Behind her, their parents sat quietly, their expressions unreadable. The moment had arrived, and she had owned it. When the ceremony ended and the applause began to fade beneath the hum of conversation and footsteps, Naomi remained seated for a moment, absorbing the weight of the day. The folding chairs around her were emptying quickly as families hurried to embrace their graduates, pose for photos, and gather belongings. Naomi closed her eyes for one heartbeat, then another, as if willing herself to remember the sensation of triumph in its rawest form. She knew the memory would be something she would return to often, not because it validated her, but because it symbolized something she had earned without shortcuts, without handouts, and without apology. Savannah found her first. She wove through the dispersing crowd in her own robe and stole, her face flushed with pride, cheeks still damp from tears. "You were magnificent," she said, wrapping her arms around Naomi in a fierce hug. "I've never been so proud of anyone in my entire life." Naomi squeezed her back. "We made it." When they pulled apart, Naomi looked over Savannah's shoulder toward the area where their parents stood. Regina and Paul lingered near a group of extended relatives who were speaking in hushed, animated tones. Several turned to look at Naomi, their expressions marked by new awareness of the woman she had become, of the story they had only partially known. Her father looked like he was trying to maintain composure, but his stiff posture gave him away. Her mother wore a smile, but it was fragile, like glass stretched thin. They didn't move toward her. Not yet. Professor Keller approached, his warm smile grounding her instantly. "You owned that stage," he said, reaching out to shake her hand. "They'll talk about your speech for years." Naomi thanked him, and he stepped aside as other professors, mentors, and even classmates came up to congratulate her. Each voice layered onto the growing realization that her story had shifted in the public eye. She was no longer just a student or a survivor. She was a leader, a figure of inspiration, a symbol of what persistence could create. The celebration continued at the business school reception held in the main atrium of the entrepreneurship wing. Faculty, alumni, donors, and top graduates were invited, and Naomi had been told a special segment of the event would honor her directly. She walked through the glass doors with Savannah at her side and Grandma Eloise on her arm, her grandmother having flown in that morning, determined to witness her granddaughter's moment of glory. The atrium was decorated in soft tones of gold and navy, with cascading banners that read, "Congratulations, Class of Champions." A large photo of Naomi accepting her Innovator Award had been printed and mounted near the center table. She was instantly swept into a tide of handshakes, hugs, and introductions. Professor Keller led her to a group of business leaders from the region who had read about her in the Business Insight article and were eager to discuss potential collaborations. One woman, Margaret Ainsley, CEO of a consulting firm specializing in minority-led ventures, handed Naomi her card and said, "I've been waiting to meet you. You're exactly the kind of mind this industry needs." As the conversations circled around her, Savannah stood off to the side, quietly taking it all in. Naomi caught her gaze and saw something in her sister's expression that she hadn't seen before. Not envy, not guilt, but awe. "I had no idea," Savannah whispered when they finally had a moment alone. "This isn't just a college job, you've built a whole world." Naomi looked around the atrium, at her team, her professors, her clients turned friends, and nodded. "Yeah, I did." Dean Sinclair took the microphone at the front of the room and called everyone's attention. The room fell quiet as she smiled at Naomi. There are moments in a university's history when one student redefines what's possible, not just for their peers, but for the institution itself, she began. Naomi James is one such student. She came to South Ridge with determination forged from adversity, and used her experience not as a weight, but as a source of strength. She didn't just excel, she created, she led, and she inspired. Today, we recognize her not only as our top graduate, but as the namesake of a new legacy, the Naomi James Resilience Award. Applause erupted. Naomi blinked against the sting of tears, feeling Savannah's hand slide into hers steady and sure. After the speeches, photos were taken. One featured Naomi standing between Savannah and Grandma Eloise, the three of them framed by the university's seal. Another captured her surrounded by her student team, arms linked, laughing without restraint. When the photographer suggested a photo with immediate family, Naomi hesitated. "I'd like one with them," she said, nodding to her grandmother and sister. "They're the ones who showed up." The rest of the evening unfolded with warmth and sincerity. Naomi received an offer from the university's MBA program director for a fully funded position in their fast-track leadership cohort, which she promised to consider. One of the guests offered her a short-term contract to redesign the digital strategy for a rural nonprofit. Everywhere she turned, doors were opening. When she and Savannah finally left the reception to attend the family dinner at the rented house, the sun had dipped low in the sky. They drove in silence for a while before Savannah spoke. "You could skip this, you know. They've barely tried." Naomi sighed. "I don't need them to try anymore, but I want them to see what they missed." The house was already full when they arrived. Laughter and music spilled out from the porch, and the smell of grilled food wafted through the open windows. Cousins played cards at the kitchen table, aunts arranged dessert trays, and someone was passing around old family photos. When Naomi stepped inside, the volume dropped just slightly before rushing back up, now focused on her. Her mother approached first. "Naomi," Regina said, holding out her arms, "you were incredible." Naomi allowed the hug, but didn't return it. "Thank you." Her father followed. He looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. "You've made quite the impression," he said, his smile uncertain. "Everyone's been talking about your speech. That scholarship, the business, the consultant job. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You never asked." He shifted awkwardly. "We're very proud." Naomi didn't respond. Instead, she walked into the living room where more relatives waited to congratulate her. They asked thoughtful questions, many offering genuine admiration. Aunt Celeste said, "I wish I had known more. You've been doing all this on your own?" Naomi nodded. "Every step." Later, at dinner, Uncle Jerome once again lifted a glass. "To Naomi, for showing us all that circumstances don't dictate success. You've changed what we thought we knew." As applause rang out, Naomi saw her parents at the end of the table, quiet, their smiles frozen. They were no longer the center of the story. For the first time, they were just characters at the edge of the frame. After dessert, when most guests had dispersed or settled into quieter corners of the house, her mother pulled her aside. "I know we got it wrong," Regina said. "I don't expect you to forgive that overnight. But we'd like to try. We see you now." Naomi studied her face, searching for sincerity. There was a trace of it there. Tired, tentative, late. "You see me now because others saw me first," she replied. "Because I succeeded without you. I'm not angry, but I've stopped waiting." Regina's shoulders dropped and she nodded slowly. "Fair." Her father joined them. "We'd like to help. If there's anything you need, apartment deposits, a business loan." Naomi shook her head. "That won't be necessary. My company's in the black, and the consulting job comes with a sign-in bonus. I'm covered." The look on Paul James's face as he processed that his daughter, whom he had once deemed too risky to invest in, now had a higher earning potential than he did, was something Naomi would remember for a long time. Before they left, Savannah suggested one final photo with just the three of them and Grandma Eloise. Naomi agreed. As the camera clicked, she realized she no longer felt like she was clinging to something that didn't want to hold her back. Her family, she now knew, was the one she built. Through effort, through love freely given, and through mutual respect. In the weeks that followed, Naomi moved into a new apartment overlooking the city skyline. It was modest, but filled with light, with space enough for a home office where she set up her business headquarters. Her student team continued working remotely while finishing their degrees. She received her first paycheck from the consulting firm and used part of it to surprise Savannah with a weekend retreat. Just the two of them. "You earned a break," she told her sister. "We both did." They walked along the shoreline at sunset, barefoot in the cooling sand, speaking of the future. Savannah had accepted a role with a nonprofit focusing on education access, inspired in part by Naomi's journey. Their conversations now were fluid and equal, no longer marred by the rivalry or imbalance that had once defined them. Later that summer, Naomi returned to campus for the formal unveiling of the scholarship bearing her name. The plaque was modest, etched with her name, a short mission statement, and the words, "For those who rise, even when they are told to sit still." She gave a short speech to the gathered crowd of donors and faculty. "This award isn't about me," she said. "It's about every student who gets overlooked, underestimated, or told that their dreams are impractical. It's a reminder that sometimes the most incredible strength grows in silence. I didn't succeed because I was supported. I succeeded because I learned to support myself, and because others eventually joined me." The applause that followed was not thunderous, but it was deeply felt. As the ceremony ended, Naomi walked alone through the campus. She passed the library where she had spent countless nights, the cafe where she had once poured coffee before sunrise, and the business hall where her dreams had slowly taken shape. The weight of her journey clung to her like a second skin, but it no longer hurt. It gave her shape, history, and purpose. She had once believed that success would mean being seen by the people who had dismissed her. Now, she understood something more profound. Success was knowing who you were when no one else could define it for you. She smiled as the breeze lifted her hair. She was free. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video here, and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to hear it.